In the first module of this lecture, I sketched an outline of the overall lecture structure, and then I give you a brief biographical sketch of Perry, his educational history, his philosophic interests, and his accomplishments within the profession. Now we want to turn our attention to the conception of philosophy that he and his collaborators outline in their article. And in doing so, I think you want to keep Russell's conception in the background here so that we can think about it in relationship to what Perry and his collaborators say, because right from the very first couple of sentences, they seem to articulate a completely antithetical notion to Russell's notion. They seem to say philosophy is this, and Russell says philosophy is not this. So let's take a look at that first couple of sentences there. Welcome to philosophy. For some of you, it will be the most practical subject you study in college. Now, first two sentences, and already Perry and his collaborators seem to be articulating a view of philosophy that ties it to practicality, that says it has practical value. And this is exactly the opposite strategy that we see in Russell. Right? In Russell, for example, we see a quote like this: "If we are not to fail in our endeavor to determine the value of philosophy, we must first free our minds from the prejudices of what are wrongly called practical people." The practical person, as the word is often used, is one who recognizes only material needs, who realizes that humans must have food for the body, but is oblivious to the necessity of providing food for the mind. So Russell, as his strategy for delineating philosophy, seeks to contrast philosophy with practicality, seems to want to distance what it is that philosophy does from everyday practical concerns. When we look at Perry and his collaborators, they want to tie philosophy right from the very first couple of sentences to practical everyday concerns. And so we might say to ourselves, these are completely contradictory notions of the nature of philosophy. How is it even possible that these two articles could articulate such dramatically different understandings of the activities that these men all seem to be engaging in? But I think that when we look a little more carefully, what we discover is that they are in fact not antithetical. They are not contradictory. They are not so dramatically different. So let's look at a couple of more quotes, again from page 3 of this article. Philosophy, Perry and his collaborators tell us, can be abstract and theoretical. So this is the contrast. There's abstract theoretical pursuits, and there are practical pursuits. And in some ways, this is a contrast that's operating in Russell. But, they say, the study of philosophy can be practical in that it affects what you do with your lives. And this is something that we see in Russell as well, where Russell says the value of philosophy is the benefits that it has for the individual studying it. So the idea here seems to be philosophy is practical. Practical because it affects what you do with your life, not practical in the sense of industry or practical in the sense of generating general knowledge. And this is in fact what they really seem to have in mind. So they tell us humans do things for reasons. We want certain things, and we believe that acting in certain ways will get us those things. So we act. Rocks don't act for reasons, but we do. It's part of what makes us human. Our desires and beliefs provide us with those reasons. Values and concepts are the building blocks of desires and beliefs. Thus, our values and our concepts play a big role in determining what we do and who we are. So now I think we get a very clear conception of what it is that Perry and his collaborators think philosophy does and why they think it is very, very practical. So you might want to stop the lecture here for a second and think about what it is you suppose they actually think is practical in philosophy. And importantly, how does it relate to what Russell had to say? So they're contrasting the abstract theoretical topic of philosophy with the practical implications of philosophical thought. And so what they tell us here is that philosophy is an abstract theoretical investigation, sure, but it's an investigation into values, concepts, beliefs, and desires. So it's an investigation into what we value, how we conceptualize the world, what we believe, what we desire, maybe what we shouldn't desire, what we shouldn't believe, and so on. So these things, they say, are the springs that drive our actions. They are the springs that help us to define who it is that we are. And because of that, even though philosophy is abstract and theoretical, it turns out to be very, very practical. And we find a similar sort of idea in Russell. Remember, Russell tells us that philosophy, like all other studies, aims primarily at knowledge. The knowledge it aims at is the kind of knowledge which gives unity and system to the body of the sciences, and the kind which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. And remember, we said that when we think about what that amounts to, what Russell seems to be telling us is, if we look at the goals of philosophic inquiry, they are all knowledge goals. And there are two kinds of knowledge that philosophy pursues. On the one hand, philosophy pursues knowledge that systematizes and unifies our conception of ourselves, of society, and of the world. And so I suggested that one type of knowledge that philosophy seeks is a worldview, a comprehensive, consistent, systematic understanding of ourselves, of society, of the universe, and how we fit into society and we fit into the universe. The other type of knowledge that we said Russell seems to be attributing as a goal of philosophy is a knowledge of the basis of our convictions. So not just the elements of our worldview, but a knowledge and insight into the strengths and the weaknesses of our reasons for those beliefs, those components of our worldview. Why are we going to believe them? What are the limitations of the evidence that we have for them? And I think here we really see how these two seemingly divergent views come together. Because what we find Perry and his collaborators saying is that philosophy means thinking as hard and as clearly as you can about some of the most interesting and enduring problems that human minds have ever encountered. So this statement of what philosophy is doing, what it means, seems to be very consistent with the notion of understanding, thinking about those basic presuppositions, those beliefs, those values, those conceptualizations that together form our worldview, our conception of ourselves, of society, of the universe, how all of those things fit together. And we're not just thinking about them, we're thinking about them as hard and as clearly as we can. We're giving ourselves a critical analysis of the basis for our worldview, in addition to developing the worldview itself.